Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Kotsaruba, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees for joining today's webinar, and a special thanks to Allison Lynch and the entire Quokka team. This afternoon, we're going to hear from our panelists. We're going to have a Q&A session. We're also going to pop in a few poll questions for our audience to answer. And if we have time, we'll be answering any audience questions that may come through in the chat below. So before we begin, I want to encourage you to submit those questions of your own and also be sure to answer the poll questions so that you can receive your CPE credit for attending today's event. With all of that said, I'd love to welcome our panelists to go ahead and come on camera and come off mute. And we're going to begin with a quick round of introductions from each of you. So if you could please share with us who you are, what agency or organization you're with, and what your role is there. Emily, could we start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Emily Odom. I am the Cyber Assistant Special Agent in charge at the FBI's Washington Field Office. So I've been in the FBI about 18 years, primarily working cyber investigations, and now oversee our investigative teams at the Washington Field Office. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very cool. Thank you. Let's go to Gemma next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gemma Howell. I'm a computer scientist at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And I have, for the past 10 years, I have focused on mobile device security related research and developing guidance related to mobile device security for the enterprise.
Thank you. And Giovanni, how about you next? You are muted. There you go.
I'm not able to turn on my video, but hello, everybody. My name is Giovanni, and I work for the U.S. Department of Interior. I am the department mobile expert for our Intune deployment, and I've been in this role for about 14 years now. Our use cases are pretty wide-ranging for our mobile device deployment, and it's been an interesting journey getting to this point.
Great, thank you. Calvin, over to you next.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Calvin Selden. So I'm the supervisory IT specialist in the FBI over the mobility program. So we handle everything from mobile device related, from the Bureau phones to tablets as well. And I've been in the Bureau for a little over 14 years now. Happy to be here, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Chris.
Hey, thanks, everyone. Chris Gogol here from Quokka. I've been working in mobile application security for about 10 years as well. History of both creating and deploying mobile application security tools for federal agencies. So looking forward to share some of the lessons learned today. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So to start off, if I could get a volunteer from the panel, and we'll hear from a few of you on this first question here, and then whoever else we have time for next. But I want to ask, what are some of the biggest threats in mobile security right now that you feel we're facing? And you can let me know if you want to jump in just by doing the raise hand icon or coming off of mute. Gemma, I see you were off mute first.
Yeah, I can volunteer as tribute for the first question. So yeah, in the past 10 years that I've been in mobile, I think consistently we've seen some of the primary threats of a long list of potential threats to mobile devices tend to be, of course, the lost or stolen phone, they're small form factor. We take them everywhere. We could easily lose them or leave them in the bathroom, which means you lose access to the information on the device. Phishing attacks primarily through way of text message, but we have email access to on our phones as well, which means someone can gain access to your credentials and gain unauthorized access to information on the device. And then malware on the device, which could lead to a number of threats, including what I mentioned earlier, unauthorized access. And those often come through via malicious apps. Malicious apps, our mobile phones run our lives, and they're only as good as the apps that are on them. And the average person probably has over 100 apps on their phone, and they probably only use half of them. But what's on those apps, the type of information that those apps have access to, how they communicate or connect with other apps, and what they're doing in the background, that could definitely cause some potential threats to the device in several different ways, including some of what I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Gemma, for kicking us off there. Emily, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a lot of what she said. Calvin can speak to the FBI phones for sure, and we can't do very much on our phones, which I think is a good thing from a mobile security standpoint. But exactly what she said, like we're on the investigative side, what we're seeing is less of, I would say, malware on the phones, but more of people using the phones for phishing attacks leading to financial credentials being stolen. We could talk a ton about data leakage and what that looks like, especially through apps. Many mobile apps request broad permissions, and that is can potentially transmit sensitive and corporate data. I think we're seeing a ton of fake investment apps, which is a big thing we're seeing on the investigative side, and then a ton of like phishing through WhatsApp. People sometimes forget that the app itself doesn't have to be malicious. It's what you're using it for. And the number of folks that'll just click on a link in WhatsApp because they think it's encrypted and it's secure and it's better is something that we see every day. So from the investigative side, certainly we're seeing mirrors that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, Chris.
Yeah, so I think all great points so far. And what I'll add is I like to classify it in kind of two main categories. Is you have apps that are good apps that are behaving badly, some coding mistake, software supply chain vulnerability that's included in an app that's trusted from a trusted vendor that may cause a data leak or other issue on the device. And then, of course, there's everyone's favorite bad apps behaving badly. So Emily, referenced a few of those. It's interesting, we also see, especially in different regions around the world, those kind of micro lending applications, those types of applications that are kind of a little bit sketchy to begin with, tend to also collect a lot more data than they need. And as Gemma said, also try to talk to a bunch of other apps that are on your phone and collect data from them too. So beyond that, there's obviously malware. Everyone knows about malware, but if you follow the mobile security space, you'll see, regularly, probably almost week over week, there's new malware being discovered that's actually in the trusted store. So the question we get a lot is like, what's my gap from when something's in the store that's malicious till it's discovered, does some harm to someone and it's removed. So that's an interesting area we can maybe talk a little bit more about later.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for bringing that up. Is there anything that any of the other panelists add before we move on to protecting ourselves from these threats? Giovanni, go ahead.
Sure. I think, at the Department of Interior, there's a broad scope of mission work that we perform. And the approach that we've taken is a approach of risk mitigation. In the 14 years that I've been involved, we went from having 16 separate sub-agency aligned MDM environments. We rolled it up into one MDM instance. So it doesn't matter what sub-agency and a particular employee has, the device experience is the same. Finally, it was always intended to be the same, but you have 16 admins, reviewing one single, OCIO directive, 16 different ways. We were getting, some inconsistencies there. One of the things I think that we did was to take the approved app list approach. We do not allow access to the public app store. That's turned into essentially approving every app that's requested for mission work. We have a process for limited personal use as well. We do leverage a app vetting tool provided by CISA. And in that combination, I think while still being aware of allowing our wide variety of employees to do mission work, field work, we've definitely reduced, I guess, our impact or our risk in still allowing access to apps in our environment. We have close to a little over 50,000 mobile devices in our environment.
Wow, yeah. Well, that leads me to our next question to open it up to the other panelists around how organizations can protect themselves from these mobile. But before we jump into that, Calvin, I see your hand raised. I'll get to you in a minute. I want to poll the audience on what is the average number of mobile apps on a mobile device. So we'll pop that poll question up here shortly. Again, this is for our audience to respond. If you want to receive your CPE credit, please go ahead and let us know. ATARC, maybe just keep that up on the screen in a moment. But yeah, jumping into the next question, Calvin, if you want to kick us, please.
All right. Yeah, so one of the things that we do, and as Emily referenced earlier, in order to protect our enterprises, we have all our devices managed. So all our devices are managed by a singular MDM, and they're corporate for business only. So what that does, it kind of protects the users, from themselves in a sense, where it allows us to manage all of the apps that are being pushed to the devices. It allows us to manage all of the updates as well, all of the patching to the phones, the devices. And sorry, the poll question popped in front, so it threw me off. But it allows us to manage all the devices, making sure that the proper patching is done from a security standpoint, and also making sure that the apps are properly updated as well. So for us, that's one of the biggest things. Again, just kind of taking full control, more like that offensive approach, and then kind of looking at it from a defensive side, just training as well. As I think Gemma, Emily, everybody referenced on the call, is the phishing attempts. We all see the ones from UPS saying, oh, if something's lost in the mail, please click this link to retrieve it, or your Amazon account has been blocked, please click this link to unlock your account. So that's another thing that we leverage, is that is training the users on what to watch out for when they get these phishing attempts on their mobile devices as well.
Yep, I almost got tripped up on one of those the other day. Gemma, please go ahead.
Yeah, something that we did in our lab was we were developing guidance around this to we took the time to look at the different threats, and then we were like, okay, what tools are out there to kind of address those threats? And mobile device management, like Calvin mentioned, was out for a while, and that certainly helps to address things like ensuring the correct policies are on the device, being able to wipe the device if you lose the phone, so no one gains unauthorized access to the device. And then there were other tools that you're able to add to kind of enhance some of your security capabilities, like mobile threat defense, to kind of have that continuous monitoring of the device, understanding the current security posture of the device on an app level, on a network level, and a device level, and then also application vetting, understanding the security of the apps that are on the device, or maybe apps that you're thinking about putting on the device. And so those are different ways and different tools that were out there that we kind of demonstrated as ways to address some of the threats that we talked about earlier.
Thank you, Gemma. Emily, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think one thing to mention that we see on the investigative side is that, we go out and speak to a lot of organizations and corporations who have corporate devices, but they do a lot of personal email on those corporate devices, right? And so that is such a huge risk for a variety of reasons. Like, we treat our personal accounts quite different than we do our corporate accounts, but keeping all of that data on the same device is just a bad practice in general. And I know sometimes it's really easy to want to have one phone to do both, but I think thinking around sort of the vulnerabilities that causes is certainly something we see quite frequently. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above are great solutions. And I think one thing to keep in mind as you're choosing, your suite of solutions is, even if you choose a fully locked down mode, Emily made a great point there, that personal and work life, it's almost impossible to differentiate. So you could have the most secure work device ever, and then if they're doing work or from their personal device, it might not matter. So a big piece of this, I think, is education for the users and awareness of these threats, because as you get out there, it might even be more beneficial for you to have an open app store in some cases, because then you're on a device that has visibility into those apps that are being installed, and they're not being installed on a personal device that you may have no visibility on, and there might be the Wild West over there. And the other piece is, for the education, is in your personal life, as you're using these applications and they're requesting permissions or they're not, they might be taking data from you. If you're at a target organization, like many of our U.S. government partners are, that personal life is almost equally as important, because the amount of information that the ad networks are able to collect through mobile applications, that adversaries are directly collecting through very popular mobile applications, is staggering, and they can be triaged and triangulated to make those phishing attacks even more powerful. So, hey, everyone knows I like to go to Korean barbecue restaurants, and my friend meets me there on Thursdays, and I could get a link for a discount, that's targeting me versus, something that's more generic, that's easier to spot. So always something to keep in mind as you're engaging not only in your work life, but your personal life with the app stores.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I see we have another panelist just join us. James, do we have you online? Are you able to come off mute and introduce yourself real quick? James Goins? Okay, we'll give James another minute to join.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
sorry. I am currently, I just finished up a couple of work meetings and got in the car and remembered, oh yes, I've got this call going on as well. So I did join late. My apologies.
That's okay. If you could just introduce yourself, what organization you're with, and what your role is there.
So yes, I am currently with the U.S. With the Marine Corps. We have part of the Navy as a PEO digital type of organization, a portfolio. I am currently working the enterprise mobility management for Marine Corps at Quantico. Been on that for less than 4 months now. All my mobile devices that I've ever worked with have essentially just been my own. So this is definitely a different world. Kind of working the engineering side of things, not so much the operation. It's more of oversight. We do have Microsoft and our operations group with the Marine Corps that kind of runs with Intune and goes along with Apple and Android devices. So as I said, it's the first time doing this, and it's definitely a challenge. And we have bring your own devices that's probably going to come along soon. I know the Navy does it right now, but we're not quite there yet, and we don't want to be there, but our hand might be forced soon. So,
Thank you,
yeah, a lot
James.
to manage. Thank you.
We're happy to have you here. You kind of just led me into my next poll question, which I'm going to ask if ATARC could put on the screen. This is again for our audience. So we want to know, how does your organization give mobile access to employees currently? If you could take a moment to respond to that. And then we are going to jump right into our third question, which again, I'll take a volunteer to kick us off, but I want to know how organizations can begin to apply secure by design principles to the apps that they build. So we're going to dive into secure by design. If any of our panelists want to volunteer to kick us off on that next question there. Calvin, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Also, so within our shop, when it comes to secure by design, so we actually the first thing we make sure is that all three phases of it are in sync from a legal standpoint, a security standpoint, and our app developers as well. So we leverage Now Secure and Third Eye with our legal team as well in order to develop our apps from the ground up. So in that process, kind of the principles we put in place, again, from the planning and research to the completion, is to have the legal aspect to make sure we're meeting the guidelines from a privacy and the data sharing component. And then from the security side, leveraging Now Secure to complete the scans and to do the mobile threat assessment on the code within the application as it's being built. And again, all three groups are in sync throughout that whole process. So then that makes it easier for when the app is completed. Then what we do is continue to maintain those partnerships. Anytime the app may need to be updated, completing quarterly scans on the applications, as Chris referenced earlier, and Gemma, and sure the rest of the panelists as well. There's new malicious code out there weekly, and a lot of people don't realize that even when it comes to building apps, a lot of developers leverage third-party code as well. So that's where that security and that quarterly app scanning really comes into play to ensure that whatever you're pulling from open source does not contain malicious code in there as well. So that's what we do in order to kind of do that 360 when it comes to building the app and then completing it. And then again, keeping it managed within our Play Store, and even going a step further to from kind of a privileged access piece is, depending on the app we build, it may only be for a specific group. So now we also put in controls in place there in order to have it only be available to one user group if it's not meant for the enterprise. So those are some of the different things we leverage in our secure principles when building our internal applications in the house.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with the groundwork, Calvin laid there. Secure by design means just that. Like you have to think of it as a key design principle, not just something that you have to pass a gate to go release. So that involves, as early as possible, as Calvin was mentioning, getting that security testing into that process, into your day-to-day rhythm as an organization. So, going so far as to integrating security testing into your daily builds, your weekly builds, is extremely important, and actually saves money too for organizations, because too often we've seen in the past, you go to complete an application, you're getting your ATO, or you're getting your penetration test at the end of the process, and you find out a key component of the app is vulnerable and you need to swap it out. Well, then you got to go back to the groundwork, spin up development resources and take some additional time. So critical to get that early in the development process, and to be intentional with security and not just checking the box there. I think is key for that. And one other thing I wanted to mention is on that supply chain side, Calvin mentioned, I think it's the statistics around like 2/3 of an app, or maybe even 3/4 now, is third-party code on average. So you can have the most secure code ever that you write yourself, but if you're not validating that third-party code you're adding into your app, it can add risks and vulnerabilities that you might not be aware of. And just some examples. We found apps in the App Store that have been published where in their privacy policy from the legal side, they're saying we collect this information, but they didn't know that that third-party library they brought in actually shared that information somewhere else, violating their own privacy policy. So going beyond just CVE checks for third-party code, but actually test that third-party code, see where it's handling your data. If it's compliant with your same standards, that's a critical piece to this too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very interesting. Thank you. Any other panelists want to weigh in on this question? Gemma?
I didn't think of what to add without repeating everything that Chris and Calvin said, because they made a lot of good points. I was thinking of the secure software development lifecycle. I'm sorry, secure software development framework. From the NIST perspective, it really aligns with everything that they were saying, really, defining right up front your security requirements, your security criteria to make sure that you have the handle on that and you're checking that throughout the kind of life cycle, software development life cycle, protecting the software itself from unauthorized access as it's being worked on and developed. And then actually producing well-secured software, making sure that you're constantly meeting those security requirements, mitigating risks, and verifying that the third-party software also complies, like they were saying there. And then, of course, constantly, identifying vulnerabilities and assessing how to remediate and address the vulnerabilities and reduce vulnerabilities in the future. So yeah, that's what came to mind when you mentioned secure by design.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm actually going to open up some of these audience questions and maybe pull from a couple here. You guys have access to them too. Just click on the Q&A button and you can browse through them. But Mark asks, are there devices or operating systems that are more vulnerable than others? So from your experience, are there some that are least or most vulnerable that you can speak to? And that's for anyone on the panel who wants to weigh in.
Our approach to DOI is that they're an equal risk. We do what we can to harden the devices within the constraints that Apple and Google develop. We leverage our MDM, depend on the MDM for the hardening piece and monitoring devices, but we don't. In our environment, we would. I don't know. That it would be impossible for us to say we're going to use just platform A or just platform B. And so for us, it's, tightening the constraints or tightening the controls that we have access to and putting out guidance, employee guidance mainly, and turning the help desk to triage issues.
Yeah, thank you, Giovanni. Chris?
Yeah, we get this question all the time, so happy to answer here. Is like, hey, I have an iPhone, I'm secure, right? Android's the ones that's insecure. So I know the background to this question, but I think I agree with Giovanni completely. Each platform is different. They're different code bases, different companies, different supply chains, but they each have their own problems. So I don't think it's a platform issue. It's just a technology issue, regardless if you're Apple, Android. Code can be misused, poor code can be inserted, malicious code can be inserted, whether that's from the device supply chain, the app supply chain, or the end user, misusing something. So regardless of your platform, this is something you should be looking into. But I will call out, often in the past, we've had customers say, well, we're going overseas, we're going to get a burner phone and buy some cheap device. Do not do that, because those are even more insecure than your standard devices, and often have more holes and more backdoors in them. So in the mobile world, smartphone world, that's not such a good idea.
Good point. All right, and then another question that I thought interesting. Patricia asks, many regulations in cybersecurity appear to be reactive rather than preemptive. What steps are being taken to proactively regulate mobile apps, particularly from a high-profile breach or national security incident which forces government action? What are the barriers to creating a more anticipatory approach to mobile app regulation, and how do you see those being overcome in the coming years? Any volunteers?
I think, well, I can speak to some of it, kind of like a high level. So, so I guess from like the offensive approach or being proactive, I think that's where the collaboration and integration piece is key. When it comes to whoever your security partner is, your legal and your app development partners are, to have that collaboration and to foster those relationships, in order to be able to continue to be innovative, but as the question states, still be able to do a proactive approach and safeguard. I mean, there's 0-day vulnerabilities that'll happen. So, I mean, you can't guard against everything. It's kind of the nature of the beast, unfortunately, with cybersecurity and with cyber threats and the way they evolve every day. So, I mean, at a high level, I would answer that and say that you have to put your parameters in place early, and you have to have a plan as to what you want your infrastructure, your app development architecture to be, as Gemma was saying earlier as well, kind of just putting those parameters and having that security framework in place ahead of time. And like Chris was saying, don't have a reactive approach, wait to do the scans at the last minute, do the research up front. And that goes for internal building apps and third-party apps as well. And that's where, we really leverage even our internal app developers, even when it comes to looking at third-party apps and deciding what we want to bring into the enterprise. Leaning on your legal resources who know the ins and outs when it comes to privacy, the data sharing. And again, as Chris was saying, how those apps can talk to each other. And then using the MDM is another offensive, proactive approach as well. Having that singular MDM where all the devices are managed. So that way you can do testing in a testing environment before migrating over to that production environment too. So a lot of those things are how you can be proactive when it comes to building mobile apps or bringing third-party mobile apps into the enterprise.
Thank you, Calvin. Anyone
Mhm.
else want to weigh in, or I can ask another audience question that's come through? Because I see another one from Sir Sin. This is thought-provoking. He asks, are terms and conditions of public stores, Apple and Android, are they sufficient enough to meet federal government policy? I feel like that's a good question. What are our panelists' thoughts on that? James,
So
go ahead.
Go ahead, Giovanni. So, yeah, go ahead. I'll just piggyback.
Yeah, as the person that has read over 5,000 terms and conditions for app use in our agency since we cut off access to the public app store altogether, I have, from the first one to the very last one, I've approached it very cautiously. I think there's definitely a difference in the dissemination between the details that are presented by the same developer on the Google side of the Play Store, same app, compared to the details that are provided on the Apple side. We do use the MAV tool to kind of validate some of the information there. At this point, I haven't to be perfectly frank, I haven't gotten. I've tried to get our legal involved in conversations about app review within our agency. We're doing our, as an IT shop, we're doing our best to record our findings. If there's any reference to PI being collected and being shared with third parties, because that does happen. There are some operational needs for that to occur on a mobile app. We record it, and we chime in back with our legal group saying, hey, we've got a list of stuff for you guys to review. But it's definitely something that I'm cautiously optimistic we can sort through at some point, but we're not there yet.
Thanks, Giovanni. We'll go Calvin and then Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, but now I'll just piggyback off what Giovanni said. I think when it comes to kind of terms and conditions, so from I can speak more from the Google side than Apple side, but sure, both may apply. So there's securities and there's play protect in place where scans are done on the apps when they're uploaded into the Google Play Store. They have a rigorous criteria that they have to go to before they're even allowed to be uploaded into the store. So that's one of kind of the safeguards in place when it comes to the terms and conditions. But at the same time, unfortunately, we live in a world with just bad people. So those terms and conditions can be manipulated from the app. I mean, they may say that it does one thing, and then it may grant permissions to several other things on your device that you weren't even aware of. So that's where, again, having that security framework, having that team in place to do that mobile app vetting before it's placed into your production environment and made available for users is imperative in the world today, to just make sure that you have that sandbox, if you will, that test environment in order to isolate that app so that if there is something there, you haven't infected your production environment within the enterprise, you can isolate it and mitigate it.
Thanks, Calvin. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Calvin said. And, there are protections in place on both stores. Apple takes a more human approach. They have human reviewers, and Google more automated, but it's not really, as we said before, a platform issue. It's really, a technology issue. They open up the capabilities to all these things, your sensitive data through this permissions, talking to other apps on the phone. There's a million different ways to use the platforms they provide. So, it's really trust the store, trust the platform, but verify, yourself, because you have to remember these providers are providing global services. They're not providing an app store just for the US government. They're providing it for, Asia, Europe, Africa, around the world. So the standards for what gets into the store are not equivalent to the US government standards for what they should be concerned about, connections to different places, security, especially you're in a DoD context, NIAP compliance for the applications. Google's not looking for NIAP compliance. Apple's not looking for NIAP compliance as a barrier to entry. So always good to line up, understand what's out there, as Calvin said, Google Play Protect, other services. But then what's the gap between that and your own policy that you're trying to achieve?
Absolutely. Giovanni, go ahead. You're muted.
I just want to add one more thing that I kind of missed. We review not just the data collection statements in the app stores, but we actually go through and review the terms and conditions when they're not the standard boilerplate that some of the Apple or Google developers are relying on. You come across it every now and then, but for anyone that's still trying to come up with or refine a app vetting process for their respective environments, can't forget those terms and conditions. There's been a few apps that we're ready to rubber stamp, ready to deploy, and deep inside these terms and conditions, it says that it's not for public government use or any type of application where there's a possible loss of life. So that restricts our law enforcement using a particular app, or our fire response teams, so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
James, are you still there? Is there anything you'd like to add in based on what's been shared so far? That was for you, James.
Not at this point, no.
Okay. So yeah, before we get to our wrap up, I just want to ask our panelists if there's anything else that hasn't been mentioned yet that you would really like our audience to know when it comes to navigating the risks in mobile apps from your perspective, or just what you see across the board, what you think is really important for our audience to walk away having understood from this discussion. Emily, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's several things have been hit on, but I think it does come down to, at the end of the day, like user training, number one, and just making sure your devices are up to date. I think from an investigative side, I'd say 90% of the issues that are reported to us that end up working fall in one of those two categories, no matter the device, whether it's mobile or computer. And certainly people are moving more towards mobile devices instead of the traditional PCs and desktops. But at the end of the day, it is back to the basics, training your folks right, keeping your phones updated. And I think, gosh, we'd save ourselves a lot of effort and money if we could get those two things right. So that would just be the one thing I offer from our side of things.
Yeah, thank you. Gemma, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna plus one that when I first started in mobile, there were some folks who were interested in using old devices, running old operating systems, because the apps on there were only functional if they used a very old version of that OS, which was important for their mission. But on the downside, those same phones on that operating system could have an app uploaded to the device in the background that could access the camera without the user even knowing. So yeah, it's very important to make sure your devices are up to date and really understand the potential risk if it's not. And just kind of reiterating what we've been saying, analyzing the apps, doing the secure by design method, and monitoring the device as a whole, continuously monitoring the device as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. Calvin, over to you.
Yeah, but I'm in a plus one as well on what Emily and Gemma said. And I think not only like keeping the OS up to date and the apps, but I would also say the hardware, because hardware does have an end of life as well. And there are times where you see old hardware still being utilized to where the security updates can no longer be pushed to those hardware devices. So it goes hand in hand. You gotta make sure you're updating the OS and updating the apps. But if you don't have the hardware that can support the updates, then that becomes a security risk or vulnerability as well. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the takeaway for me, I know all of us on this panel, and probably most of you attending as well, are interested in these types of issues and are aware of these types of issues and are willing to explore more. So I'll make a call out to the audience to help us champion these issues, because at the Federal Mobility Summit just last week, I think one of the speakers mentioned over half of all government communications are over mobile. It's no longer, the thing that people can ignore and throw in the corner. And I know a lot of my partners in the government that are doing Giovanni's job at vetting, Calvin's job, working with vetting, get pushback from their, peers to say, hey, why are you restricting this? It's on Apple. They get a lot of grief for trying to make people secure. So help us spread the word and make sure everyone's aware of what's going on these devices, what the risks are, and why it's important to pay attention to them.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. And we have a third poll question that we're going to put up here on the screen for our audience, which is, How is your organization protecting against mobile app threats on employee devices? So we want to hear from you on that. And then be sure to stick around to the very end because we do have one last poll question. But before we go, I do want to take the opportunity to hear from each one of you for one key takeaway from this discussion, something that maybe stood out to you. James, would you like to kick us off with our round of key takeaways based on what's just been said so far?
Sure, I'll lead this off. To piggyback a little bit off the last discussion just for a minute, one of the things I'm learning is, we're talking updates and make sure the devices are updated and these type things. I'm learning in particular with the newest Apple that they just released, this week, is to know what these updates are going to do, right? Pay attention, research what it's going to do before we actually update and upgrade. But I wanted to add that. So just to know what it does, what the security is, what features it's going to add to the device and to the OS, and to, take a good look at that and see how it's going to affect your environment. Takeaway so far is that just all the knowledge that is out there that was, I've just heard from the panelists just here, the little time I've spent. And if I wanted to ask if you had POCs, information that maybe could be passed, not in this forum, obviously, but at another place. But just the fact that, there are challenges out there in, people wanting to use and do personal tasks on the work phones or vice versa, and how important it's becoming for us to really pay attention and secure these devices the best we can. And yes, we take flack from those that might not be as quite aware of the danger of mobile devices these days. So that would be my takeaway, my discussion points. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Calvin, can we go to you next for your key takeaway from today?
Sure. So I think the biggest key takeaway for me, I would say, is guess 3 things. Trust but verify. That's definitely always when it comes to looking at these apps and determining what you want to bring into your ecosystem. Communication and collaboration as well. I think the communication piece goes with the user training to communicate to the users, hey, here's what to look out for in the phishing attempts, and then the collaboration for everybody who is in the app vetting space or trying to build out their shop, or even trying to build out their mobile shop, to just have that collaboration as well with legal, with whoever your development team is. So those are the 3 takeaways from me today.
Awesome. Thank you. Gemma, let's go to you next, please.
Man, I had to think of another key takeaway because I thought the last thing we said was it. I was like, oh, Emily started us off well. But no, I think there's always plenty to say. And the way the discussion was outlined, I think, yes, there are threats. They can be scary, it's dangerous, but all is not lost. There are opportunities to train individuals on both, work security and protecting their work environment, but also there's some opportunity to train on how to secure your personal information, especially if those things end up being on the same device. And also there are tools available, some of which we've discussed, MDMs, MTDs, mobile application vetting solutions, tools available to help secure our devices from these threats. And there are people on this panel who are working to ensure that, these tools are in place, the requirements are in place, and these devices are secure for you. And so I think that's pretty much it there. there are things to worry about, but there are also ways to address those risks as well.
Thank you. Giovanni, over to you next.
Yeah, I think, almost from a selfish perspective, I'm geographically limited in certain respects because I'm located in Denver, Colorado, where a lot of my peers appears to be located in the Virginia, DC area. And I think my takeaway here is that I need personally to do a much greater effort in collaborating with other sister agencies. I've made attempts in the past. I think a year ago I was at it might have been the Quokka meetup in Virginia, and that was the first time I was ever in a room with other folks that were directly involved in the same type of work that I'm in. And so I think that there's an effort of collaboration across agencies. I mean, I'm still searching for a contact at Department of State. We're our agency leader is a cabinet position with the president, and she travels with the Department of State internationally. The WhatsApp stuff has to be installed on that person's device and their travel party's device. And we have a process for that, but I've been, as an example, I've been trying to pursue my equivalent at Department of State to kind of understand why they're using WhatsApp for, as an example, and what paperwork they've done to justify, because we don't have it. It's always a drive-by. Hey, here's a list of people who need this access for this amount of time. We get the app installed, and then it's a passing of directions for any record retention that needs to happen, because we can't do that at the MDM level. I can't do that from Denver. So that's the biggest takeaway, Kirsten, is the collaboration piece with my peers, or our peers, I should say.
Yeah, thank you. Emily, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think I read somewhere that I think in 2023, the number of attacks on mobile devices was like a 50% increase from the previous year. I think we're going to see that continue to rise. I think outside of just the phishing piece, but finding exploits on the phones in general. I mean, it's typically from our sides. You see it on the national security side from other countries who've developed some capabilities, right? But I think that's going to change probably over the next 5 years or so. So I think just continuing to be vigilant and to learn about, the devices and stay in this space, I think is just going to come more important as the years go by, because I could see a future where we're all on mobile devices completely, and it's going to be a good landscape for attackers to really focus their efforts, which I don't think they've really directed efforts that way as this in the same way they have other devices. So that would be my takeaway.
Awesome, thank you. And Chris, we will end it with you.
All right. Well, I agree with all the takeaways so far. So I'll just add, when you're thinking about the mobile security suite and the solutions you're going to put in place, that proactive versus reactive, I'll just hit on that point I made a little bit earlier as well. Is sometimes you may be better off with a user that's using even personal apps on a work device, because you'll have awareness of what those personal apps are doing. And have the ability to give them feedback and help them secure themselves. Gemma and I were talking about personal security just last week. Also, it's tough to have that split between work and personal, then also guide them on personal life. So always fully locked down, corporate owned, work only, Kobo devices might not be the best for all scenarios. In certain scenarios, it definitely is. But to do some research on those different options, because they do have different positives and negatives. So situational awareness on those applications and the data that your employees and users are spreading around the world can be an important factor when you're making those decisions.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists and everybody at home who joined us today. Like I said before, there's a last poll question, which is, would you like to receive your CPE credit? So be sure to respond to that. And Yeah, thanks again for our partners at Quokka for making today's event even possible. We hope to see everyone at the next webinar on Thursdays for our regular series. But we also have GuideTech coming up in 2025. There's the award nominations. They are live, and be sure to submit yours by October 18th. Otherwise, we will see you at the next webinar, and thanks again, everyone, for participating. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.